I'm Billy S, welcome to the channel. Today we're discussing the results of my Dark Souls 3 boss difficulty community ranking. I asked my viewers to rank each boss from the game on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being insanely easy and 10 being insanely impossible. And from there I worked out all the averages of all the votes to determine the results. We've done this a bunch of times now, but I just want to say thank you to all 565 voters for taking on this task. It was much appreciated. As you all know, I supplement each entry with voter comments, so we can get some thoughts from the community alongside my own. For this video though, I'll be limiting each entry to 3 voter comments. As to be honest, the Dark Souls 2 community ranking video nearly killed me with how many I tried to include. So if your comment doesn't make it, please don't feel bad, I still appreciate you taking the time to write them. But before we continue, I just want to let you all know we are doing a community ranking on the boss difficulty from Shadow of the Erdtree. I'll leave a link in the pinned comment on this video in case you want to take part. Voting closes on the 21st of July. Now then, my community's Dark Souls 3's easiest to hardest bosses, ranked. Let me know your easiest and hardest boss from the game down below. At number 25, we have the Deacons of the Deep, who scored a total average of 1.98 out of 10. With 186 votes for easiest boss, this placement doesn't shock me in the slightest. The Deacons have always been considered a bit of a joke within the community, since the gimmick of their fight leaves them without much room for defense. You have to follow a spirit around that possesses the different deacons, attacking the body it currently inhabits to do damage. If you're remotely good at crowd controlling enemies, you shouldn't have trouble with the first half of the fight, unless you get a tad greedy, in which case I will say the potential for death is there. The second half of the fight holds a couple more risks, but not by much. The main Archdeacon of the Deep will spawn, and the rest of the fight involves hitting him to whittle the health bar down. The only real danger here is the curse spell, where you have to interrupt its casting by killing the casters around the Archdeacon. Otherwise, the area will be bathed in a curse-inflicting fog. I don't think I need to explain why that would be worrying to let alone. There's also the Deep Soul spell, which is a large homing mass of darkness that ignores the pillars and the coffin within the arena to chase you down. If it hits, that's even more curse buildup, but you should be capable of rolling out of the way. Also, apparently the blue deacons can heal the main boss if left alone for too long, but I don't think I've actually seen that happen in any of my playthroughs. An example of how easy this boss is that its one power to allow it to survive for a while longer can be mostly ignored. How about the voters? What did they think? A lot of people will say the deacons are the easiest, but that damn curse wrecked me on my first playthrough, and can still catch experienced players from time to time. I'll admit, as someone who personally wouldn't rank the Deacons as the easiest boss of Dark Souls 3, I'm glad I wasn't the only one who sometimes gets caught out by the curse damage. I would love to give my thoughts on the Church Squad. I love bosses that use gimmicks from past games, and the Deacons are just that. Phalanx and Royal Vat Vanguard would be proud. I believe the Deacons are a fine-tuned version, actually being a threat that is. The fireballs and sucker punches from the larger Deacons can leave you drained, the perfect victim when the Pope Gang comes in with the Shadow Ball. I'll definitely agree that of the 3 boss fights mentioned in this comment, I do prefer the Deacons. I don't think they're the pinnacle of gaming or anything, but for a gimmick fight, they did the job they set out to do, and they did it well. Deacons of the Deep was a highlight. They were the easier mid-game boss that made me think, hey, I can do this. As a strength build in my first playthrough, it was like Conor McGregor fighting a preschool class. It's that Muso effect all over again. There's just something inherently satisfying about beating up waves upon waves of creepy fanatics, especially with a good strength weapon that allows you to part them like the Red Sea. The overwhelming sentiment among the voters was that while the Deacons are considered an easy boss fight, they actually have more supporters than you'd expect from the easiest bosses in these rankings. Good on them, they deserve it. At number 24, we have the Ancient Wyvern, who scored a total average of 2 out of 10. Something I've noticed about the Dark Souls 3 rankings is that my voters trend towards ranking gimmicky bosses as easier than regular fights. Which is a valid viewpoint. After all, you only need to figure out the gimmick once, making subsequent fights a breeze. The Ancient Wyvern is a special case though, as it doesn't even fall under the moniker of a proper boss fight. It's just a continuation of the level you were already in, as to defeat the boss you just have to progress through the outer walls of Archdragon Peak. Then simply plunging attack the head from this walkway and the fight is over. The challenge doesn't come from the boss itself, but the enemies placed in your way. The big man serpents wield large axes that can crush you in an instant, and the one placed before the ladder leading to safety has his attached to a chain, so he can strike you from long range. Honestly, a pretty cool weapon design. All the while, the Ancient Wyvern itself will be trying to blast you with fire, not successfully, but as said, it is trying. A boss that dies in one hit was never going to make it high up on the list, and that just makes sense. I feel Ancient Wyvern is basically a stage hazard. While it's been a few years since I've played Dark Souls 3, the only times I've ever died to it is when the plunging attack randomly fails, and I die of fall damage. But that's less the boss being difficult, but a glitch costing an attempt. Even then, I'd just sprint past everything and pray I don't get hit on the ladder. I still find it insane that it's possible to actually fail the plunging attack. The one aspect of the fight that needed to work 100% of the time, and yet there's the smallest chance you'll miss your window and go plummeting into the stones below. Hilarious From Software, absolutely hilarious. I have to point out the true real boss of this fight, the giant man serpent with the chain axe. This abomination of an enemy gets me every time with its attack that goes through objects. Moreover, it's also the last enemy before the plunge, so I have to redo all the run back. Yeah, you know what's up. If you can get past the chain axe serpent and his horrifying range and ability to hit you on the rebound as he pulls his weapon back, you'll be fine. But failing there multiple times can get very frustrating very quickly. I actually think the Ancient Wyvern boss fight might be one of the easier ones, if you know how it works, but it definitely is one of the most epic in the entire game. That arena is just awesome and very well designed. For a first blind playthrough, I guess I can agree. Encountering the Ancient Wyvern initially is an exciting prospect, and the backdrop of the blue skies of the Archdragon Peak gives it a unique feel. And the path through the arena is designed well, with a few optional side paths for items and a healthy amount of enemies to face. But that doesn't save the Wyvern from the easiest boss allegations, nor does it excite me when there are so many better dragon fights in the series. We just got Bale after all, so going back to the Ancient Wyvern is certainly a sensation. At number 23, we have High Lord Wolnir, who scored a total average of 2.52 out of 10. Rounding out the trio of gimmick bosses in the bottom three, I once again fully understand the rating, even if I don't agree myself. Wolnir has a very simple gimmick: destroy the 3 rings on his arms to send him back to the Shadow Realm. I distinctly recall struggling against him on my original playthrough, using a suboptimal build and being concerned about how close I could get to his arms before the void behind him would catch me, because Wolnir's fight has a lot to look out for. You've got him crawling towards you, he's got a series of hand slams, he can breathe vape gas onto the arena that can devastate your health bar, and at a certain point he can summon skeletons to attack you, as well as his giant sword of light. The trick is that on repeat playthroughs, it's very easy to kill Wolnir before he does any of those attacks, as you can see from my footage. You can immediately attack his glowing rings before picking up the item that triggers his boss fight, and with a small amount of confidence and a hard-hitting weapon, you can shatter his weak points before he even has time to start climbing. My reasoning for choosing Wolnir as my personal easiest boss in the game is because of where he's placed progression-wise. I think that Vort and Udex are easier moveset-wise, but they pose a challenge because you have less stats, equipment, and in the case of first-time players, experience with the game. But by the time you get to Wolnir, you've fought more difficult bosses like Abyss Watchers and have good enough weapons and health that he's a steamroll with basically any build, as long as you don't get hit by the fog. I don't think that makes him a bad boss though, but he would have been cooler if he had real attacks. Now this is an informed take I can admire, Wolnir's placement being right after the tough but fair Abyss Watchers and the surprisingly difficult Catacombs makes his fight feel all the more easier by comparison. You think the gimmick fights are over after dealing with the Deacons, the Crystal Sage, the Curse-Rotted Greatwood, only for Wolnir to hit you up like, hey bitch! You're only ever in danger with him when he summons his skeletons, as all of his personal attacks are well telegraphed and easy to dodge. So this commenter is right, he's easy to steamroll once you know what's up. High Lord Wolnir is a good example of why I don't like 95% of gimmick fights in these games. It felt like on my first run with Wolnir, I hardly had any time to hit his bracelets before he retreated, and then the slow process would repeat with me chasing his hands down, getting ganked by skeletons, insta-kill missed, all unfun aspects in one package. This fight feels like a waste of time when you die, during the fight and even after. Fights like this give me zero satisfaction, and that is why I say it's the worst boss from my experience in Dark Souls 3. Yeah, I recall my first attempts with Wolnir were similar. He has a tendency to move his bracelets a lot, making it hard to get one solid hit in, unless you're already intimately familiar with his moveset. I do think this was needed as an element of balancing, otherwise it'd be too easy, but perhaps it's an inherent flaw with the gimmick being used. It's the fact that to enter his boss room, you always have to click on the cup to trigger the warp to his arena, which can be an extra bit of tedium on top of the boss run back. High Lord Wolnir, what is there to say? Cool jump scare? Yes. Amazing atmosphere? Yes. Mechanically challenging or interesting? No. The advancing mist is the only thing that actually caused a death for me in this fight, when I didn't know the mechanics. And while fully focusing on the armbands, I've actually managed to kill him so fast he couldn't even get his sword summon off. Shame for such a cool design. That cool design is part of why I'll always have a soft spot for Wolnir. He's got such a cool aesthetic, and the atmosphere of his fight is dark and creepy, but it doesn't save him from a simple-to-read moveset. At number 22, we have Vort of the Boreal Valley, who scored a total average of 2.84 out of 10. I'm of the opinion that we should be seeing early game bosses at the bottom of these lists. They need to be easy to give the game a fair difficulty curve, and Vort fulfills his role to a T. Introducing the new Frostbite status with his chilling mace attacks, Vort starts off as your traditional four-legged beast boss. He moves towards you slowly with deliberate strikes you can roll through or dodge, and the classic strategy of hugging his behind works wonders for doing damage. It's so easy to get beneath his legs, making it almost impossible for him to hit you with his generic melee attacks. And ironically, his enraged state where he buffs himself mid-fight makes him easier. He'll begin a pattern of charge attacks which can be dodged to the side rather easily, then he'll turn around and begin a slow ice breath attack that you can easily use to run behind him and wail on his butt. He's a boss that looks more threatening than he actually is, and rewards players who have an aggressive playstyle. Dodging inwards becomes a more viable strategy after Bloodborne, and we can see that here in full force. Vort is not difficult, but he doesn't really need to be. He's well balanced for his place in the game as the first non-tutorial boss, and his OST is maybe the most iconic in the entire game. I actually think it's hilarious that Vort's OST went viral for being the quintessential Dark Souls meme music, and yet in its actual context, he's a shockingly easy fight. And as this comment pointed out, that's okay. He's the second boss of the game, he doesn't have to be insanely hard. For veterans, he's simple, and for new players, he's a fair challenge that might take a few tries. Vort is a complete joke, easiest in the game by far. You can roll into him and dodge everything with no effort at all. When he transitions to phase 2, you can run behind him while he does his frost beam attack and do even more damage. His charge attack is the only thing that could possibly trip you up, but even that is easy to dodge with practice. This boss would be completely forgotten if it wasn't for the memes with his theme song in it. And I'm glad we live in a world where Vort was not forgotten. The power of memes will always prevail, and beyond that, Vort's character design is fire. Or should I say ice? You're right though that he's still easy as fuck. In a game of wonderful and majestic bosses, Vort of the Boreal Valley stands out as an incredibly easy enemy. And I think that being so easy is exactly what the game needed and what makes him memorable. Despite his intimidating appearance, his attacks go from deceptively easy to laughably so, which should give new players a rush of satisfaction and confidence when they defeat him without much issue, after most likely being destroyed by Woedenaz not too much earlier. Planting the idea that maybe this isn't impossible after all, and that even I can do it, is both healthy and kind of necessary, actually, to keep newcomers invested. So although he doesn't adhere to the regular idea of what a boss should be, I appreciate his existence all the same. Banger OST too. Exactly! Vought does a great job at gassing new players up by being intimidating enough to where they'll be concerned if they can win the fight, but easy enough to where it gives those newcomers a sense of excitement as they dodge into his attacks or shield his brutal swings to come out on top. Easy bosses are needed in Souls games, and that's something I'm glad my audience is understanding. That being said, Vought was the only boss to not get a vote for favourite or least favourite boss in my poll. Like, not even one pity vote for favourite. Even the curse-rotted Greatwood got a vote for favourite boss. At least I can live with the fact that nobody dislikes Vought, I guess. At number 21, we have Woedenaz Gundyr, who scored a total average of 2.92 out of 10. The first boss of the game, Woedenaz was special for bucking the trend that tutorial bosses had to be somewhat easy. Not including the Vanguard from Demon's Souls, since you only ever got one attempt at him per run, Woedenaz had a full halberd moveset, and was a lot smaller than the usual slow giant demons players were used to, which meant you actually had to play well to overcome him. What I love is that regardless of the class you choose, Woedenaz is designed so that he can be overcame with all of them. Some have it easier than others. Pyromancers can absolutely melt his second phase once the pus of man spurts forth, but that level of balancing is tough to achieve and works wonders. I personally find him to be the easiest boss in this game, but only because he's the boss I've fought the most times in this game over the years. You have to get good at him on every replay, so my criteria might not match anyone else's. I love that for his second phase, you're actively encouraged to dodge towards him, as despite the threatening nature of his transformation, you're at your safest right next to the guy. It does take the camera for one hell of a ride, but once you've got his hitboxes down, Woedenaz will fall like any other fight. I will use this space to talk about the best tutorial boss in the series. I think he's the best. Woedenaz Gundyr. My main reason is pretty simple. Dark Souls 3 was my first Souls game, and in my first playthrough, he destroyed me. I'm sure he killed me at least 60 times, but I kept trying. I felt that every death was my fault, and that every try was a bit better than the last. And when I finally killed him, I knew this game was something special. Woedenaz Gundyr doesn't just teach you the game mechanics, he also shows you the beauty of this game's difficulty, and how it makes an already good combat system amazing. I think if you started the Souls series with Dark Souls 3, Woedenaz Gundyr will always remain a harder fight in your memory than people who started with the earlier games, because those first bosses you get stuck on remain with you, and it's why, while I find Woedenaz the easiest boss in the game, I know that's not a shared sentiment in the slightest. Every death is the fault of the player, because Woedenaz takes his time with his combos, and they don't go on for too long, so as long as you're managing your stamina and being observant, you can come out on top. It's nice that FromSoft thought, yeah, let's actually challenge the player this time, and they had faith that players would overcome this opening challenge. Hey Billy, hope you're enjoying reading all of these. Woedenaz, while as a first boss is much more involved than most of the rest of FromSoft's catalogue, he still stands out as the easiest in the game to me. His dodge rolls, timings are generous overall, even in his second phase. Most of his attacks can be simply positioned away from if you're not too greedy. So dodging isn't even that needed, he leaves ample time between attacks to exploit, and ranged attacks completely nullify him. But I'd still say overall he's probably harder than all the other first bosses in Soulsborne, including my beloved Phalanx. Yeah, I'm still reading all of these, don't you worry. I think the fact that Woedenaz is considered one of the easiest fights in this game, but would probably be considered a mid-difficulty fight in something like Demon's Souls or Dark Souls, says a lot about the trend in boss difficulty following Dark Souls 3. The perfect tutorial boss, a truly intimidating opponent for a new player, and a complete joke for anyone who keeps their composure. Excellent at punishing panic rolls, and not remotely dangerous in any other way. I love this guy, still the best tutorial boss ever. Just wanted to add this comment because, oh boy, I still panic roll against Woedenaz. I have some bad Soulsborne habits, and I like that even though he punishes panic rolling, it's never to the extent where you're immediately killed. It just puts you on the back foot for a while, which is a nice difficulty for a tutorial boss to have. At number 20, we have the Curse-Rotted Greatwood, who scored a total average of 2.94 out of 10. Before we even get to the difficulty, let's get the obvious out of the way. According to my voters, this was the least favourite boss on the poll, with 130 votes going his way. None of the others even broke triple digits in that category. The problem with the Greatwood is that, like other gimmick bosses, it doesn't have much to it on repeat playthroughs, so once you've experienced the fight on your first run, future variations won't change much. You damage the boss by destroying the white egg sacs across its body, some on its legs, some on its back, some on its front. The first part of the fight I don't particularly enjoy because of the inclusion of the regular enemies who serve to get in your way. Some of them hit surprisingly hard, and it takes away from the boss itself in my opinion. At half health, you drop through the floor into a more fitting boss arena, and the boss grows a giant white arm that acts as an extra weak point for the player to damage, at the expense of having tougher to avoid attacks. I just hate this boss, I'm gonna be honest. Having to fight it any time I want to get the transposing kiln to use my boss souls is so rude. He's not hard, he's just so uninteresting, and his fight goes on a tad longer than it needs to. At least he has a massive fire weakness. That being said, we have one voter who decided to write a thesis on this boss, so they'll be taking over this entry, though I'll be paraphrasing a little bit so we're not here for 15 minutes. Let's have a read, shall we? Of all the bosses, I'll choose to highlight the fucking Curse-Rotted Greatwood, and simultaneously argue that it's both the easiest boss in the game, and also a slightly, and I do mean slightly, redeemable one. Why, oh why do I do this to myself? Moving on. One thing I started to notice in my Dark Souls 3 runs is that it suffers from the reverse problem that Dark Souls 1 has. The first half of the game is rather underwhelming compared to what comes after. Or to be more precise, I think the stretch of the game in between Vort and your arrival in Irithyll is full of throwaway areas and bosses. Not all of them, mind you, the Abyss Watcher's fight in the Cathedral of the Deep area are notable exceptions, but my point still stands. So where does the Curse-Rotted Greatwood come into this? Well, given the context of underwhelmingness in this part of your journey, I don't think he's too bad at all. Dark Souls 3 sure loves its gimmick fights, and out of this lot, I hate to say it, but Curse-Rotted Greatwood is genuinely my favourite, perhaps second only to Yorm, who borders on being a more traditional fight anyway. How could this be, I hear you ask? Well, to start with the bad, as I alluded to previously, I believe Curse-Rotted Greatwood is the easiest boss in the game, which might be a tad controversial. The reason I think this is mainly due to its attacks being possibly the slowest and most forgiving in all of Dark Souls 3, much more so than Woedenaz or Vort, who are relatively tough tutorial bosses. Curse-Rotted Greatwood in comparison might be the only boss I never died to, including in New Game Plus cycles. The most he's got are basic hollows in his arena, which you should be more than familiar with at this point, and a weird hand thing on his second phase, which can't do much since the boss is almost dead by that point. On magic-only builds, he might be tricky to hit, but as long as you have even below average melee options, you're golden. So what makes this boss click for me then? Simply put, I enjoy his gimmick. Hit the weak points to deal massive damage. It's silly, but when I fight Curse-Rotted Greatwood, I feel almost like I'm fighting a budget Shadow of the Colossus boss without the climbing. It's fun to have a look around this huge tree-like creature to find little ball clusters to whack. Wolnir has a similar sort of idea with his bling, but in a much more in-your-face and less interesting fashion, in my opinion. Overall, Curse-Rotted Greatwood is still pretty lackluster in the grand scheme of things, and I'll pick most of the Dark Souls 3 roster over it any day, but for being such an unorthodox encounter, I don't think it was handled too badly at all, besides its disappointing difficulty. And importantly, when you're roughly in the same stretch of the game as shit like Deacons, Crystal Sage, or Wolnir, it's easier to look past your problems and appreciate you for what you are. At least if you're silly-ass me, anyhow. You know what? I may despise this boss with a passion, and I will never learn to love it, but I always enjoy when someone comes out to defend them and backs up their points relatively well. A bit wordy, I feel like a teacher grading an essay, but I respect the hustle on this comment. Dark Souls 3's first third is so boring in comparison to the rest of the game, and if this is the gimmick boss that intrigues you the most, I can see why you'd be drawn to it. It's not my cup of tea, and I don't personally get the Shadow of the Colossus angle, but I think the essay will ring true for many of the viewers at home. At number 19, we have Yorm the Giant, who scored a total average of 3.1 out of 10. Oh wow, another gimmick fight. What a shocker. Yorm is a special case for Dark Souls 3 being a big fat reference to Demon Souls, as the only way to defeat him is to acquire the Storm Ruler weapon next to his throne and use its unique weapon art to slice the boss to pieces. If you completed Siegward's questline, you'll also have him on speed dial to help combat the boss, giving you not one, but 2 ways to stun him into submission. If that doesn't sound easy, I don't know what does. Yorm does have a small element of difficulty in the ferocity of his attacks, however. Once he embers up, his combos have a surprising level of reach, and since it takes a decent chunk of time to charge up the Storm Ruler's special skill, Yorm can very easily knock you out of the animation before it completes. I think he lands higher on this list than the previous entries purely because, as a Lord of Cinder, when he does hit you, he hits you hard. But I honestly find him to be one of the easiest fights in the game from a conceptual standpoint, and I'm curious to see if others feel the same way. With 35 votes for easiest boss, he is on the radar at the least. Yorm is an epic cinematic fight that doesn't balance difficulty well. That's why Storm King and Rykard are excellent fights, because they balance cinematics and challenge. The hardest part about Yorm is equipping the Storm Ruler from your inventory. You know what, nobody ever actually talks about how difficult it is to go into your inventory, find the Storm Ruler among your litany of other weapons, and equip it without Yorm going to town on your ass. Luckily I had Siegward on my first attempt to draw aggro, but without him, you're basically asking for an instant death the moment you open your menu. Really makes me wish we had that recent items tab they added in Elden Ring here. Yorm the Giant is a disappointment of a boss. He's built up in the opening, and the doorway/dialogue has the most powerful imposing of the 3 lords before Lothric. He's got a really cool design, great lore, then you show up and he folds in half like a wet noodle to 4 to 5 hits of the Storm Ruler. I award him nil point. You can tell the game wanted to go for a he's so powerful he can only be defeated with the special weapon storyline, but for some reason it doesn't work here, while it totally works with Rykard and the Storm King. As this comment said, he's so hyped up in the pre-game cutscene that by the time you actually reach him, you're expecting something insane and it's just not that. Abyss Watchers really set the Lord of Cinder bar a bit too high. I adore Yorm. I love Yorm for many reasons, including his appearance, lore, and my gosh, that OST, chef's kiss, mwah. I personally wish there was more to the fight though. Understandably, you were given a weapon tied to his lore to help defeat him, the Storm Ruler, but it unmistakably makes the fight a cakewalk. Even more so if you have Siegward with the same weapon by your side, and why wouldn't you, we love Siegward, making the fight even shorter and leaves me sad that it couldn't have lasted longer. I wish I could rank Yorm higher given everything the character has in the lore, all he's been through, he deserves to be higher, and deserves a better boss fight. But in the end, all we got was a great experience, not a great fight. It's such a shame because Yorm's lore and potential was so limitless. He just left us wanting more, and for a Lord of Cinder to be in the bottom 10 easiest bosses in the game, that's missed opportunities right there. At number 18, we have the Crystal Sage, who scored a total average of 3.53 out of 10. See, the reason why this boss ranks higher than the others is because he's a half gimmick, half regular fight. The math is mathing, and I'd say this is the first of the bosses on this list that could genuinely cause people a lot of trouble. Magic is a damage type that doesn't have a lot of defense in the early game, so if you're not careful, you get easily 1 or 2 shot by the Crystal Sage's soul spears and homing attacks. Even more so when you've got all those spells being fired at you multiple times due to his cloning mechanic halfway through the fight. He has a magic attack that rains from above, so no matter how far away you are, you're still a target. And with all those crystals that appear throughout the second half of the fight, I wouldn't blame anyone for feeling a bit overwhelmed. But the Sage doesn't have a high health pool, so any damaging weapon combo will come in handy to bring the fight to a quick close. Just follow the purple sorceries, dodge any lasers coming your way, and you'll get your win. Just don't be my boyfriend, who wasn't even able to find this boss on his first playthrough. It wasn't until he met me and I explained that there's an entire area he hadn't seen in the Crucifixion Woods and the Cathedral that he was able to reach the Crystal Sage. But what of our voters? Not a particularly remarkable boss design-wise, but I feel that the difficulty of the Crystal Sage is almost perfect for that stage of the game. Definitely cheesable, what isn't, but learning their attacks is your first real magic ranged boss challenge so far. Once you learn how their clones work, choosing to rush the real Sage or clearing out the clones for safety is a pretty good gameplay mechanic for early game. I think the Sage also kinda trains you for how to approach Aldrich later on the same game path, bum rush in melee, then sprint strafe or use structures to block the magic attacks. Good balance and a nice teaching tool. I guess I take magic fights for granted in that they all function very similarly, but you make a good point. The fight with the Sage and the fight with Aldrich are very similar in function, so one could very well be a good teaching tool for the other, even if it was unintentional on the part of the devs. I also like that this boss gives players the option, rush the main clone, or play it safe and take out the fakes. Either way, you'll have a path to victory, you just choose the one that fits your playstyle the best. I am in the rare minority who find Crystal Sage unreasonably hard. Like, on any run, I go to Sage with a +9 normal weapon. On my soul level 1, I struggled against her to the point that with a +9 weapon, it took me 15 tries till I got a scripted win. I pulled out all the stops, +9 raw broadsword, charcoal of pine resin, RTSR, naked with Flynn's ring. At this rate, I could finally beat her SL1. It was such a pain, I cannot handle magic ganks for the life of me. Definitely don't feel bad if there's a boss that doesn't click with you like it does for others. Difficulty is inherently subjective, and we all have that one boss people find easy that we find hard. Crystal Sage is honestly one of the more understandable options because that magic just hits you like a truck if you let it. There's no tanking it here. Also, just a question, what does RTSR mean? I'm not that familiar with the Dark Souls 3 acronyms, sorry. Crystal Sage is one of those fights for me that I find both annoying and somehow endearing. The hardest part of this fight is finding him after his second phase if he doesn't start casting immediately, and not getting blasted by his clones. Other than that, his spells are pretty easy to dodge and maneuver around, he can be parried for a big riposte, and he can't teleport away if he has crystal soul mass surrounding him. I also wanted to highlight this comment because it actually taught me something new. I had no idea that the Sage couldn't teleport away if the Crystal Soul Mass spell was active. It makes complete sense, but that feels like important knowledge for me for the future, for sure. The Crystal Sage marks a turning point in this video, as I can feel the wind shifting in difficulty. How fun. At number 17, we have the Old Demon King, who scored a total average of 4.48 out of 10, and was the only boss to not receive any votes for easiest or hardest boss on today's ranking. Of all the bosses on this list, the Old Demon King is the hardest to rank, because his level of difficulty is determined by when during the game you face him. Take him on the moment you access Smouldering Lake, and you'll have a tough fight that'll take a few tries to get down. His damage will be threatening, and his fire spells will feel dangerous enough you have to play carefully. The reality, though, is that most players either won't realize they can reach Smouldering Lake due to the obscure entry requirement, or they'll leave him for later because who actually wants to go down to Smouldering Lake when Irithyll is right in front of them? Fighting the Old Demon King later on provides us an easier fight, and I actually think it fits the story of the boss more. This creature is on its last legs, surrounded by the corpses of his people. He's exhausted, yet summons the last of his Chaos Flame of Izalith to fight you. I love his fire attacks, like the ring that extends inwards and outwards, or his meteor attack that you can avoid with careful positioning. It's when at low health he staggers and grows weaker, unable to summon his flames for a period, that really hammers home the concept of his fight. You're supposed to overcome him, and I think taking it on later provides a more satisfactory lore conclusion at the expense of general difficulty. Old Demon King feels like a culmination of how the previous demon bosses in the trilogy behave, considering a lot of its attacks, plus it feels like what the Demon Fire Sage should have been. Still gives me a lot of trouble thanks to the delays in some of his attacks and his significant number of AoEs, though of course you can choose your difficulty in the fight depending on when you want to fight him. His AoEs are definitely his greatest strength difficulty-wise, as they can be hard to adapt to when you least expect them, and with his delayed attacks, you're looking at a boss that can be fairly challenging when he wants to be. More people should try fighting him earlier in the playthrough. I think it'd be a fun experience. Probably the most meh boss in the game. I find he's quite hard to dodge, but he never actually kills me. His last stand mechanic is cool though. It's given me a real scare before when I've not quite managed to kill him before it goes off. While I don't want FromSoft to overuse the concept, I do adore a last stand mechanic in Soulsborne games. We recently saw it again in Shadow of the Erdtree with the Shadow Tree Avatar fight, and it worked just as well there. Maybe I just love the trope of a boss on its last legs desperately clinging to life until we come and finish it off. At number 16, we have the Champion's Gravetender and Champion's Great Wolf, who scored a total average of 4.73 out of 10. The most forgettable fight in the game for me, which isn't helped by the fact its difficulty curve is inherently average, which is a problem because this was an optional endgame DLC boss. The Gravetender has a couple of small wolves that might cause trouble if you don't immediately kill them, but once dealt with, it's just a PvP match against an NPC whose only existence is to advertise the Valorheart weapon. It's a cool gladiator-looking sword and shield, but the NPC doesn't really sell it for me. It's possible to kill him before the Great Wolf is even able to get an attack off, which is the ideal outcome because the Great Wolf is the only real element of danger in this fight. Mostly because of his charge attack that has an odd hitbox that always caught me off guard regardless of my dodge timing. The only other danger comes from the ice breath from the wolf. It's harder to capitalize on than you'd think. You just have to make up distance and go for hits whenever you can, creating a damage race to see who'll kill the other first. Apparently, if an NPC lives long enough to fight alongside the wolf, he can also use ice magic, which is fun. I've literally never seen it myself, though. We've got another thesis for this entry, so whoever you are, take it away. I can barely begin to describe my experience with the Champion's Gravetender. For once, he was lurking there in silence, waiting for a challenger to approach, and judging by the arena, a great battle was sure to come. The arena captivates you like barely anything else does, and there is also the constant fear of you dying and having to do the horrible run back all over again. Pausing the thesis for a moment, I'm going to assume this voter doesn't know about the bonfire on the ice lake at the bottom of the roots, which makes the run back an absolute breeze. If that's the case, I feel for them, I really do. Then you have the fight itself. He has a couple of wolves with him as a clever foreshadowing to what is about to happen. It's an NPC, so you know what's up. He uses a unique weapon and shield, and judging by the item he drops, he has plenty of experience fighting as a gladiator. It was riveting how I would watch him do the same light attack combo and block stance over and over again while I could do nothing but to strike in panic until his stance was broken so I could finally penetrate his defenses and go in for the crit. Just like that, most of his health finally went down, but that was only the start. A giant howl and the expression of terror on my face when a regular enemy I've already fought 3 times in the same area suddenly joins the fight and isn't on my side. Unlike other doggos in Souls games, like the fiery one from Bloodborne, the magic one from Elden Ring, and the ugly-looking one from Dark Souls 1, this wolf is not unique in the slightest, but that only serves to make it more threatening. Hold up. Sif from Dark Souls 1, ugly? I'm actually offended for a fictional wolf right now. Thought you could sneak that one in there? Not on this channel. The attacks that it does have are absolutely ferocious. A charge attack on something not called Vort, how dare it! A breath attack that doesn't deal damage, but instead frostbites you, so you get damaged more by its quick and surprisingly unspecial melee attacks, And you are meant to deal with that while the Gravetender is still standing in the corner menacingly staring at you with his shield up. How does this game expect us to deal with all of that while also fearing the run back and being distracted by the beauty of the painted world? How does it suppose that we do anything with all the different questions surrounding us? Why is this a DLC boss you had to pay for? Why is this a regular NPC and a regular enemy smushed together? Why was Rob in Mario Kart DS? All those questions and so little answers. That, ladies, gentlemen, and fellow eldritch spawn beyond cishet comprehension such as myself, is why I think the single greatest achievement and the hardest challenge in any game is without a shadow of a doubt, the one, the two, the only, the one of many, the Gravetender, and his Great Wolf. Thanks for hearing me out. Oh yes, applause and fireworks. By the way, I'm writing this at 2:09 without glasses and filled with caffeine, so please excuse any mistakes I may have made in my valiant effort to inspire the masses. It is not a job I take pride in doing, but it's necessary. All jokes aside, you summed up the Gravetender and Great Wolf pretty well. I think your experience was a lot harder than the masses, but I like that you didn't pull any punches in pointing out how uninspired the movesets actually are, and the reuse of the Great Wolf throughout the DLC not exactly having the feeling FromSoft were hoping for. But bestie, please use the bonfire near the boss arena next time, do yourself a favor and save yourself the trauma. But most importantly though, why was Rob in Mario Kart DS? At number 15, we have Half-Light Spear of the Church, who scored a total average of 4.79 out of 10. This is another interesting case, as depending on whether you face an AI or an actual player, your experiences could end up quite different. I'm not surprised, but a little sad to see Half-Light as one of the most hated bosses in the game, with 90 votes for least favourite fight. Like, he's not blowing anybody's minds or anything, but I honestly don't think he's as bad as people say he is. Though that also stems from my last playthrough where his AI actually proved a serious challenge. He's got short and long range attacks to cover for any potential threats, from his homing orbs, his electric spears that can be launched from the ground, to his energy slashes that slide across the floor. The difficulty for me comes from the 2 Church Guardians that are spawned mid-fight, as well as needing to kill off Adjudicator Hugo nice and early. The moment you're distracted with one of them, Half-Light will jump at the opportunity to attack from behind, and if he pulls out his bow, you better know how to dodge. I once claimed he's like if Genichiro Ashina from Sekiro was in a Dark Souls game, and I stand by that, even down to how similar their models look. He's tough for an NPC, at least for me, but he's also the type of boss you can easily cheese with various different builds. I can't speak for the PvP aspect though. Ancient Wyvern is tedium because of the run-up, but Half-Light is completely unavoidable and didn't really improve for me regardless of fighting them offline versus online. NPC battles are why I dislike a large swath of Dark Souls 2, so putting this jag off right before one of the favourite fights in the series feels like targeting harassment. Rude. I definitely think the fact he comes between Dark Eater Midir and Slave Knight Gale is a bit of a death knell for this boss. I think FromSoft learned that this genre of fight, Invader bosses, just isn't meshing well with the majority of the player base. I especially prefer PvE because it gives me a sense of predictability. PvP meanwhile is the exact opposite. I'm atrocious at any form of facing other players because I can't really put myself in their shoes and predict what they'll do next, and that might be why some people dislike Half-Light. I'd say I'm pretty good at Souls, but I really suck at PvP. Especially when my opponent is someone who purposefully plays Dark Souls 3 in 2023 to bully players trying to complete the DLC. And even offline, I struggle with the boss itself and the 2 dump painting guardians who get a sneaky heal in every time. It is really a shame that I always have to play my least favourite boss to get to my most beloved one. P.S. at Judicator Argo, go kill yourself because I can't stand your monologue every single time I go through the fog wall. Pretty much every comment on this boss was negative. Not a single person was defending him. It's just interesting to see how inconsistent people find his difficulty, which makes sense why he's landed here in the middle of the pack. At number 14, we have ItsZerozz, the Consumed King, who scored a total average of 5.53 out of 10. A boss that I have infamously shit-talked to the horror of Dark Souls 3 fans, but that I have since come around on. I think ItsZerozz deserves to sit in the middle of the pack for this game. The first half of the fight is rather tame. He has a series of bonking attacks with his staff, and some small combos that can catch you off guard if you're not used to the timings. He has a single magic move where he summons a large field of mist that damages the player, forcing you to step back. Basically, the true fight doesn't begin until half health, where he drops to all fours and begins to abandon his humanity, the draconic nature of his transformation taking over. And this is where I feel his difficulty lies. ItsZerozz has one of the most busted charge attacks in Soulsborne, as it does an insanely high amount of damage, and the hitbox is so messed up that it's incredibly difficult to avoid if you let him get it off. He's got a crystal breath that inflicts curse, and the rest of his attacks are these forward slashes that will combo you into oblivion if you're caught in them. Very blood-starved beast-coded, combined with a tough-to-dodge tail spin, and you have a moveset that can feel incredibly frantic if you don't get lucky with your positioning. In my winning run, I was able to kill him before he used his charge attack, but I had multiple attempts that ended in failure because he got too comfortable with his enraged moveset. ItsZerozz is really hard to figure out for me. All the other bosses have pretty good telegraphs I could learn relatively quickly, but I'd like to give ItsZerozz the F for flailing, probably the most tries on first attempt. Yeah, ItsZerozz's telegraphing is all over the place. I think because most of his kit is just flailing and slashing, it's hard to tell what move is what because there's nothing unique about his attacks. On my first playthrough, not counting DLC, this was the boss I died the most to. His attacks just felt uncanny and unpredictable. He's essentially a Bloodborne boss in design and gameplay. Now that I've fought him a few times, it's a little easier, but this boss still haunts my dreams. As I said, blood-starved beast-coded. His level of regression is much higher than that of previous bosses too, which always manages to put players on the back foot if they don't kill him during his enrage transition. Fuck ItsZerozz's charge attack in the second phase, no timing to it at all. Everything else in that phase doesn't do much damage and is relatively easy to dodge, but then you have the untelegraphed charge that takes out most of your health bar. At least you know it comes right when he goes mad. The first phase is doable though, with the attacks also not being that damaging, even though it feels like the hitboxes on them are a bit weird. Nice to see I'm not the only one convinced that ItsZerozz's hitboxes are off. It's like he's not a hard fight, he just has hard moments that will sometimes occur and sometimes won't. There's no level of consistency, but that also means that sometimes his fight is extremely easy, and thus he always ends up in the middle of a difficulty ranking. At number 13, we have the Abyss Watchers, who scored a total average of 5.8 out of 10. Now this is a case where I think you guys nailed the placement perfectly, as the Abyss Watchers are meant to be your first proper challenge in the early to mid-game. They're your first Lord of Cinder you face, which means you want to at least feel like you're earning your victory. And they have multiple phases to drive home that this is a fight designed to be tough, but make the first phase more manageable by providing you with an ally should you survive long enough to have 3 Abyss Watchers in the fray at once. Their movesets aren't overly complex, having a handful of sword combos you need to learn, which get enhanced during the second phase with trails of fire and various flame effects following each swing. It's very Lady Maria of the Astral Clock Tower, and for the time didn't feel like a reused trope. Nowadays, everyone has extra AoEs to their sword swings, but back then it felt novel as fuck. The Abyss Watchers also don't have a ton of health, which makes it more likely for the player to eventually overcome their fight to progress the story. Heck, panic rolling is a valid strategy in certain cases. The Abyss Watchers are a fight that I always wish was harder. The fight is amazing mechanically with the gank being balanced by the neutral Watcher, but they simply go down too quickly. While I love the fight, I wish the second phase had a bit more HP and wouldn't stagger so much. I think it's a very positive feeling when people are asking for a fight to be tougher because they enjoyed the experience so much. Not my boyfriend though, he had a rough time of Dark Souls 3's early game, not helped by the fact that he just couldn't get the neutral Abyss Watcher to stay on his side. While I could go, well, he did this and that wrong, he should have done this differently route, I like my relationship, so I'll have to concede to his points for now. You've spent 3 games fighting gank after gank boss, and you see that second Abyss Watcher spawn in, and then the third. When you believe the third is going to overwhelm you, he joins your side and makes it a 2v2. It's marvelous. The only thing I wish this fight has was a larger health pool in the second phase. This fight makes me wish bonfire ascetics were a thing in Dark Souls 3. The Abyss Watchers certainly stand out as one of the best gank fights in the series for me, and they're really the first boss outside of Iudex Gundyr to really take advantage of the speed of the new combat system, to create a flowing dance of dodging, blocking, and taking in the combos of your opponent. As the voter said, it's marvelous. But not everyone feels that way. Abyss Watchers are the hardest fight and I hate them. The first phase feels all about trying to wait and continually dodge until the red-eyed one finally gives you an opportunity for a 1v1 or gets hit on the main health bar. This phase is a boring slog that always takes me 5 to 10 minutes. It honestly feels like a run back, and that run back feels like frigid outskirts. The second phase is just an extremely challenging sword fight that would be fun if it wasn't for the looming threat of doing the first phase again. While I do respect this opinion, and everyone is entitled to their own thoughts and experiences, I personally think the Abyss Watcher's Phase 1 is all about taking risks and playing aggressive. If you're too passive, the first two Watchers will gang up on you and you won't even have a chance to make a counterattack, even with the third Watcher who comes to your aid. You have to be proactive, and given their smaller than average health pool, if you come in with a decently upgraded weapon, you're already entering with the advantage. At the very least, I can't understand it being as hard as the Frigid Outskirts, but if that's your story, who am I to attest to that? At number 12, we have Aldrich, Devourer of Gods, who scored a total average of 5.95 out of 10. The last of the mid-game Lords of Cinder, Aldrich is a boss that I feel is mostly well balanced, with a handful of moves that get powered up during his embered form, but who has the capacity to be one of the most frustrating fights in the game if your magic resistance and stamina isn't up to snuff. Those little fairy lights he launches that home in on the player after a short while can take off a large chunk of your health bar if you're not careful. His melee attacks are easy to dodge, no issues avoiding the scythe with a decent roll, and damaging Aldrich isn't tough either since he doesn't have a high health pool. It's the price he pays for being a magic boss. The main danger, and easily the attack that has caused the most pain in the community, is his homing rain of arrows. In his non-embered state, he'll just launch arrows outwards in a cone that you can dodge to avoid, but once embered, his arrow attack becomes a homing trail that will follow the player until the ends of the earth. If this attack is fired and you don't have any stamina left, accept your death, because it will catch up to you. It lasts way longer than you'd expect, and will leave you respawned at the nearest bonfire. Without it, I'd say the fight loses a lot of its difficulty, aside from the aforementioned fairy lights, so it all comes down to, do you think this fight should be easier, or is the difficulty right where it is? I'm personally fine with the state of Aldrich's fight, but that's just my opinion. It is hard to decide which one is the best boss. This game has too many good bosses. It was easier to decide the worst one. I hated Aldrich on my first playthrough. Maybe I'll change my mind when I play it again. I'm doing this crazy thing called Platinum Trophy of all the Soulsborne. I feel so stupid for that. Anyway, thank you for all your content. I love to listen to you and I love your videos. Kisses from Italy. You know, I think Aldrich is a boss that gets better with time. Once you know his tricks, you can at least start prepping for them way in advance. Also, best of luck on your platinum runs. You'll find the bosses won't be the issue. It's going to be farming Covenant items so you can collect certain Covenant rewards to unlock certain spells, miracles, etc. for those achievements. Get used to farming Silver Knights, Lothric Knights, and Karthus skeletons because, ooh boy. Aldrich was the first boss that gave me some real difficulty. Usually most magic-based fights in these games are relatively easy, but Aldrich was a really tough fight. His Soul Spear barrage always catches me, his homing Soul Mass attack always depleting my stamina, and my god, the arrow attack. It's manageable in Phase 1, but it is outrageous in Phase 2. I can't do anything but run unless I have a suicide wish, always making me low on stamina for when I want to attack him. But it was also a very fun fight. His lore is also cool, basically eating so many people he became a slug, and his design is one of my favourite in the series. His Life Hunt Scythe being a clear reference to Priscilla, and his spear having the Gravelord's sword on the tip, and of course my femboy Pookie Bear Gwendolyn basically being eaten by him. Overall, my favourite magic fight in the Dark Souls trilogy, and one of my favourite fights out of all the games. Yeah, from a gameplay perspective, all his attacks do have counters to them, but I think it's the fact that to avoid the arrows you always have to run away as an example that makes him difficult. Elden Ring, for example, lets you challenge bosses in so many different ways with so much build variety that going back to Dark Souls 3 where bosses like Aldrich have maybe 2 different strategies you can take is its own level of difficulty. I despise Aldrich. He's my least favourite boss in the series. I know it's supposed to be easy, but I struggle so much against casters. They tend to be spammers, their magic always does a ton of damage, and there's something about the projectiles that messes with my depth perception, and makes it so much harder to dodge than melee attacks. Aldrich has all of that, plus the fact that he hits like a fucking truck, at least at the point I've encountered him in my playthroughs. I hate having to run past the Deacons and the Silver Knights every time I die to him too. What I hate most about him is his arrow rain, or whatever it's called. I've never been able to fully avoid taking damage. Magic boss, hard, basically. If you're alright, I just want to correct one thing about your statement. Aldrich isn't supposed to be easy, so please don't feel bad that you struggle with a boss like him. He's tough. He killed a lot of us many times on our first playthroughs, and even nowadays, I still have a run or two where he'll catch me off guard. Casters are hard. They're less frequent in these games, so the ways to deal with them are less obvious than blocking a big sword or dodging a giant axe swing, you know? His boss run back is also an absolute pain, fully agree on that front. If you can try and get some magic resistance buffs on a future playthrough, see if that helps you out. At number 11, we have the Dragon Slayer armor, who scored a total average of 6.39 out of 10. Honestly, I'm always happy to see this boss getting recognition because it's one of the better fights of the game, and I think the level of difficulty is perfect for where it lands. It has a massive Dragon Slayer Great Axe and Great Shield that it uses to combat the player, and I found that a nice combination of rolling and blocking was the way to go. He hits hard, so stamina is a concern, but the arena is wide enough for you to get some space if you need to heal. I love that he uses weapon arts like the player, two-handing his axe so he can let off a brutal damage-dealing charge attack. He'll slam his shield down against you before backhanding you with it to create extra damage. His weapon is charged with electricity as well, and he can create wind AoEs with certain slams you have to avoid. The only part of the fight that's a bit harder to predict are the butterflies, which can either fire balls of energy or giant lasers to pierce the bridge. I found them easy enough to dodge through, but I admittedly would rather just have the Dragon Slayer armor get an extra attack or two, and send those pilgrim butterflies back to the Shadow Realm. I don't have too much to say about this fight other than I absolutely love it and wanted to give it some extra love. The shield makes positioning matter more, there's a little bit of cheekiness with their fake out, dodging feels great against his attacks. I never felt too bothered by the angel magic since it felt like as long as I was moving I wasn't being hit, and then they were just added fireworks to a blast of a battle. It's a fight I always look forward to. This is one of the bosses that feels tailor-made with the combat of Dark Souls 3 in mind, which is a weird thing to say because you would think every boss falls under that category, but fighting the Dragon Slayer armor with this kit just feels right. I wouldn't say that for some of the fights we've already covered. The fight is pure adrenaline, no one portrays weight like FromSoft, and Dragon Slayer armor throws its weight. Unfortunately, like most bosses in this game, it doesn't have enough health for me. A fair complaint, I wouldn't have minded an extra bump to the health bar to make the fight last a tad longer. I tend to beat the Dragon Slayer armor first try nowadays. But then there's always the rematch in the DLC Swamp if I'm really getting the cravings. Dragon Slayer armor is all about aggression and attack strings that throw you off. He's always keeping close to you whether you like it or not, and his attack strings feel just random enough to where you're never fully sure what he's going to do next. I like that, even though he kicks my ass. Never really felt the pilgrim butterflies make that much of an impact when I fight him, thanks to the fountain being able to block projectiles, but they certainly make for a great atmosphere. Using a weapon with quick attacks that's able to exploit the little downtime he gives you is the strategy I've usually pulled on him. Yeah, you hit the nail bang on the head, voter. His attack strings throw you off, and yet there's a sense of familiarity with a lot of his attacks, and a leniency that means you might still get away with a dodge if you go a second early. I like that, because we have typical delayed attacks, but with careful positioning and timing, you can learn to handle those alongside the more traditional attack combos. Just a really solid boss that deserves its spot in the top half of today's list. We're halfway through the list, I'm incredibly hot, you might hear a fan in the background, and I couldn't be fucked to do my usual lighting, so if you guys are interested in this channel and you like what you're seeing, we're trying to reach 35,000 subscribers by the end of 2023. If you want to help out with that goal, be sure to parry that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all my future videos, or you can consider going the extra mile and become a channel member. It gives you early access to future videos, it gives you a shout out in the description, and at the end of every video as well. It's a nice way to support the channel, and I would just be very grateful. So back to the Dark Souls 3 community ranking. At number 10, we have Champion Gundyr, who scored a total average of 6.71 out of 10. I put Champion Gundyr in the same slot as the Dragon Slayer armor. Both are fights that feel inherently designed with the player's kit in mind when it comes to Dark Souls 3. and both fights are very reactionary as you dodge aggressive combo swings while attempting to take control of the fight. Being an upgraded version of Udex Gundyr, when the champion takes the stage and begins elbowing you in the face to stop you from attacking while running circles around you to launch his halberd your way, you know you're in the thick of it. He doesn't have any special ultra attacks or anything, just a varied amount of attack strings that you have to learn to react to, which is the type of boss fight I really enjoy. He eases you in with the Udex Gundyr moves, and then after a short period of time decides to showcase why he is the champion. I find that panic rolling is a surprisingly viable strategy in this fight. You may waste an Estus or two, but with how his weapon plays, there are a lot of safe spots to position yourself in during his combos. It's just hard to get off a safe heal due to how quickly he can close distance on you. And yet, in my first ever playthrough, I was able to beat Champion Gundyr on my first attempt. He felt hard, I didn't feel like I was taking on an easy fight or anything, but I was still able to come out on top, and I think that's the mark of something truly special. And that's without parrying. He's got a big weakness to parries once you learn the timing, and I think that changes his boss fight experience completely. I genuinely love everything about Champion Gundyr. His phase transition with red eyes is so imposing. There's not a single move he does that feels cheesy or unfair. He almost feels like a precursor to some Elden Ring bosses to me, with his very aggressive yet perfectly fair yet awesomely simple moveset. Exactly. There's no real element of unfairness here. He's a hidden optional boss after all, so we're expected to know how to deal with a higher level of difficulty. I think he's more lenient than our Elden Ring bosses, but I honestly prefer that myself. Champion Gundyr might be big, mean, and very aggressive, but most of his attacks are easily dodgeable by just panic rolling to his side, and the jump attack gives plenty of time to drink an Estus or two. Most strategies that work on Udex Gundyr also work on Champion Gundyr. Great boss, not that hard, beat him on my second try. Somebody else recognizing that panic rolling is truly the only way to play these games? I'm kidding, of course. But the fact is, for this boss fight in specific, it works. It works good. Most other players will probably rank Champion Gundyr much higher than I did, but I feel like the fight is so easily trivialized with parrying once you get it down, it's hard to justify putting him any higher. I could probably beat him with a +0 weapon 9 out of 10 times at this point. Yeah, I've fought him quite a few times. Still probably my favorite base game fight along with the Twin Princes. Parrying his charge at the start of second phase is just something else when it comes to satisfaction. And it's that parrying weakness that likely explains why he only ranks at number 10. Without it, I think he ranks higher than a couple of the entries still to go on this list, no problem. But the fact people still love his fight is proof they did something right designing this boss. At number 9, we have the Dancer of the Boreal Valley, who scored a total average of 6.84 out of 10. I was expecting the Dancer to be in the top half of today's list, yet I'm still surprised to see her land at 9th place. Is it an unwelcome placement? Hell no, I'm happy for her. Part of why the Dancer will either feel harder or easier to some players is precisely because of her title as a dancer. Her movements and animations are graceful, with a lot of flourishes that make it hard to tell when to dodge, when to attack, and when the attacks are coming. Combined with the eerie music that plays in the background, there are reports of multiple players finding her fight easier with the music muted, and I suspect that while there's no actual trickery going on, that the tone of the beat can throw people off. Combined with her long Beyblade combos, her devastating grab that can one-shot lower level players, and her overall high damage output, and you have a fight that'll have you practicing time after time to succeed. The aesthetic, along with the relatively higher difficulty of the Dancer, makes her my favourite fight of the game, though Soul of Cinder is a close second. But the Dancer with her erratic yet fluid motion makes this fight feel truly like a dance. I can't get enough of this fight. Keep up the awesome work, by the way, and greetings from this joke of a country, the good old USA. Comparing her animations to, say, Artorias from Dark Souls, for example, I can read him like the Lord of the Rings trilogy, easy. Meanwhile, the Dancer is some high-level algebra math bullshit where I need to figure out the volume of the circumference of C equals B22.69 squared or something. Can you tell I wasn't good at mathematics? So I definitely want to talk about my experience with the Dancer. Some months ago, I started playing Dark Souls 3 just because a friend told me that it's a good and difficult game. The thing is that most of the time I'm pretty trash in video games in general, but it quickly became clear that I was not bad at this game. I beat most of the game's bosses in under 10 tries, and it was pretty rare for me to need more tries for a boss. Sullivan and Soul of Cinder were the only exceptions. They were the only two bosses where I needed around 25-30 tries. With all that in mind, it is even more laughable that the boss I died to the most was the Dancer. I died so often to her that I even lost my death count at some point. I probably needed about 150 to 200 tries for the Dancer, and it broke me completely. The funny thing about it is that my friend told me before I faced this boss that she is one of the easiest bosses in the game, and that he beat her first try. This really traumatic but really cool fight actually made me buy her armor after her fight and her weapons. I then just kept playing with that equipment until I finished the game. What I really liked about the boss was the mysterious cold theme with her footsteps, and the boss design was also really cool. Greetings from Germany, by the way, hope my English isn't that bad, smiley face. Don't you worry, I can always clear up the grammar from my voters before using them in a video, so we can get your points across clearly. And it sounds like you had the classic, everyone says this boss is easy, but I found them hard storyline. We've all gone through it. I'd say the Dancer is a completely fair boss to get stuck at. Her footsteps can be very distracting with how haunting they are, especially as they tend to sync to the music. Love that you also used her armor set for the rest of the game. That's trauma bonding right there, and I totally relate. It's why I always wear Artorias' gear when I can, regardless of the game it's in. Surprisingly, just below that user though, we had another voter gushing about the Dancer. So, take it away. Most people will probably say that Gale is their favourite boss, but the boss who taught me how to play Dark Souls 3 and the boss who made me fall in love with this game is the Dancer of the Boreal Valley. I was told that if I killed the woman who gave me the banner at the beginning of the game, I could unlock a ton of items to boost me, up in the tower behind her. So I did. I wasn't warned doing so would unlock a late game boss, so imagine my surprise when she came floating down from the ceiling. Her moveset is hauntingly beautiful, from the dancing sword sweeps to the graceful combos. Even though I fought her at such an early stage, I bashed my face into her for hours because the moveset was so well telegraphed and fair, I believed I should be able to win if I just put my head to it. I was right. All the fights in this game are memorable and are a cinematic feast. But this fight lives up to her name and feels like a dance. Her phase 2 raises the stakes with her dark flame attacks, which are quite difficult to manage, but still feels painfully fair. More so than any fight in this game, this fight made me feel like every time I died was my own shortcoming. After 6 hours, I took this girl down, and most of the game was probably made easy by defeating her as early as I did, which probably affected my voting, but I wouldn't take it back for anything. Keep your nameless king and slave knight Gale. I'll save the last dance for the Dancer of the Boreal Valley. If there's anyone who has the right to talk about the Dancer's quality and difficulty, it is someone who took her down in the early game before you're supposed to. That is a power move, a flex, and also proof that these games are surmountable. You just have to be willing to put your nose to the grindstone and work things out. Helps that the Dancer is just that good of a fight too. At number 8, we have the Soul of Cinder, who scored a total average of 7.31 out of 10. The final boss of the game, the Soul of Cinder is one of the few fights in Dark Souls 3 to still catch me off guard when I replay these games. Because I go into it always thinking, oh, it wasn't that hard, and then the boss has shifted into 4 different movesets and gotten me to waste way too much Estus in the first round. Depending on the weapon he uses, he has a host of different moves you have to handle, all based on the players that once linked the fire. He's got it all, and I think it's very easy to get greedy and find yourself slain by an attack you weren't expecting from one of his 5 movesets. Even with full Estus, I often find myself pushed down to a small amount each time I play, compounded by the fact that his second phase, where he summons the spirit of Gwyn, Lord of Cinder, is hyper-aggressive. Not to the extent of the original Gwyn, you actually have opportunities to heal in this case, but enough to where his wombo combos and lightning spears present a valid danger. There's so much to keep track of with this fight that making it through takes a real sense of commitment and knowledge of the combat system, and it's one of the most fulfilling fights in the series to boot. You should really do it before taking on the DLCs though, as coming to the Soul of Cinder after beating Frida and Gale can make him feel like a complete pushover. Soul of Cinder is the ultimate culmination of every unkindled and chosen undead who's ever lit the fire, and the weapon transitions tell just that. SOC is quite varied and complex. The straight sword moveset, a curved sword moveset with pyromancy, a long spear with some divine miracles, a catalyst for some sorceries, and lastly, a grave sword moveset with some sunlight miracles reminiscing the Lord Gwyn himself in the second phase. His attacks can be strafed, only one attack can't be dodged through, the Plin Plin Plon attack that ends with an explosion. He's quite aggressive himself, only at times giving you space to heal and readjust. His moves are quick and hit hard. He likes to vary and delay some of his swings. SOC demands you to pay attention and act accordingly, to not play too aggressively or too passively. Also, feels damage is a real thing. Plin Plin Plon. I think I need to call his wombo combo attack the Plin Plin Plon attack from now on, but you sum up exactly why the Soul of Cinder lands where he does, but also, I think player preparation goes a long way towards the difficulty of this fight. Come with all your Estus flasks and upgrades, and you can cheese your way through the fight after learning a couple of moves. I know I've panicked rolled my way to victory once or twice, but I appreciate that he strikes the perfect balance of aggressiveness for a final boss, unlike a certain someone from Shadow of the Erdtree. The final boss of Dark Souls 3 is the hardest boss in this game to dodge. It's such a shame that getting hit by it is like having cereal thrown at you. Honestly, I think Soul of Cinder is brilliantly balanced, but I do wish it actually forced me to get good at it instead of letting me play it by instinct. A valid point, Soul of Cinder's damage is overall a lot more lenient than some of the bosses I'm used to in the series. He hurts, but it's rare that he kills you outright. When you die, it's often because of a choice the player made as opposed to a combo from the boss. And that's a fair criticism and why I think the Soul of Cinder is only in the 8th place spot. Soul of Cinder is very underrated in terms of difficulty in my opinion. He has the most complex moveset of all the bosses, including 3 different weapon types you have to learn and really varied ranged attacks. In addition, he's very aggressive, especially in the curved sword phase. He is one of the few bosses I couldn't, and still can't, find opportunities to attack in some situations. He can heal very much of his health as often as he wants, which extends the fight. Plus, I find his dodge timings very difficult in most of his attacks, including delays and surprisingly fast combos. And yeah, he has a second phase with a new health bar with even new attacks. I think he summarizes the elements of Dark Souls 3 really well, making him a perfect end boss and also for the Dark Souls series. You know what, voter? Props to you. I forgot the fucker could heal with his Faith moveset. I knew I didn't like that Great Lance for a reason. Just for that, this comment deserved to be featured, teaching me new things about this fight even to this day. At number 7, we have the twin princes, Elder Prince Lorien and Younger Prince Lothric, who scored a total average of 7.4 out of 10. If I were ranking these bosses myself, no poll in hand, the twin princes would definitely be in this spot, if not higher, because this was the pair that I struggled with the most during my original runs of Dark Souls 3. There's something about the way Elder Prince Lorien teleports that puts me on edge. You can lock onto him so your camera will whip around to where he's teleporting to, allowing you to dodge his incoming attacks, and if your lock-on cancels, it means he's fucked off to the other side of the arena to do his Holy Flame attack. It took me so long to get used to his moveset, death after death, and I didn't have the elevator next to the boss room unlocked because I didn't see it in my first playthrough, so I was running up that bridge filled with enemies every time I retried the fight. But I got damn good at dodging his moveset, to the point where I could do phase 1 flawlessly. Then Lorien jumps in with his magic and fucks the whole rhythm up. He's so difficult to keep track of. He'll fire little blasts of holy damage just to fuck with you, before sending a homing army of golden projectiles your way. All the while, Lorien is teleporting behind you, so you have to worry about dodging him as well. And with Lothric being the vulnerable brother, it's all about depleting his health as best you can to take home the win. They truly are the hardest Lord of Cinder fight, and it's not even close. Getting good at this fight is a skill. I'm proud to say they're a fan favourite fight too, with 52 votes for favourite boss, the 3rd highest in the poll. You go, boys! My first run in Dark Souls 3 with the Twin Princes had me spending a grueling week within the confines of their boss arena, bedroom ? Dying over and over again. I went with a Fume Ultra Greatsword build, and the slow swings plus my greed were consistently punished. Each attempt I adapted little by little to the big guy's moveset and tendencies. Each sword swing combo, each teleportation to a sword beam slash, each death felt more painful than the last. But the pure joy I got seeing Lord of Cinder Fallen grace my screen is what forever hooked me to the Souls genre. Now, on every subsequent playthrough, this is the fight I look forward to the most. While the difficulty isn't the nightmare it once was for me, the flow and rhythm of this duel is what feeds my very own Dark Soul. More than most bosses, the Twin Princes seem primed to punish the greediest of players. They have openings, and if you try to pressure those openings further, that's when you'll get a teleported greatsword to the face or a magic blast to the back. But this voter had a similar experience as I did, because once you get good at this fight, it fuels you. It just hits right, like a cold glass of water on a hot summer's day. Despite how well the boss fight is liked by the community, Lorien and Lothric is still underrated to me even then. The difficulty feels perfectly balanced when nothing feels unfair, but at the same time there are enough elements, teleporting from Lorien, magic from Lothric in the second phase, where you always have to be on your toes. The fight against the Twin Princes is where the dodge timings felt like second nature. You could go into the battle with just pure instinct. A fight where you can beat it the first time but still feel like you were challenged, in my opinion at least, shows that the difficulty was fine-tuned to perfection. Damn, my voters are doing my job for me at this point. Some of you are way more eloquent than I ever could be. Maybe consider starting some YouTube channels of your own? I hate to describe it like this, but dodging in this fight really feels like going Dragon Ball Ultra Instinct. You just feel it in the air. The Twin Princes fight is the best FromSoft boss fight as far as I'm concerned, and that's due to a combination of music, design, mechanics, emotional attachment, and of course difficulty. The boss uses a great mix of melee and ranged as the fight progresses, and includes a unique mechanic that makes the fight interesting without being gimmicky. Tough, fair, and so wonderful I named my twin cats after them. Love the channel, bestie, keep on slaying! Shout out then to elder cat Lorien and younger cat Lothric. I always have time to shout out somebody's pets. Twin Princes hit a perfect level of difficulty at the time, and even now still provides a strong experience, even with Elden Ring sharpening everybody's skills to a higher degree. At number 6, we have Pontiff Sullivan, who scored a total average of 7.53 out of 10. I knew the moment I started this poll that the Pontiff was going to rank highly. It doesn't matter that you can parry him immediately at the start of the boss fight, or that his moveset has gotten easier over time for more experienced players, because the reality is, new players coming into Dark Souls 3 almost always find a wall in the Pontiff. There's just an energy about his fight that forces players to get stuck for an hour. Maybe it's his twin swords of fire and magic that you have to fight around, dodging and blocking through his well-telegraphed combos. Maybe it's the fast-acting stab attack that if it connects, knocks you over completely, while if it misses, gives you a big fat opportunity to get some attacks in. Or maybe it's the fact he summons a fucking JoJo stand that copies his movements exactly, creating two bosses you have to fight and avoid at the same time. Luckily, his Phantom doesn't have as much health, and if you get lucky you can demolish it after a few hits, but with the Pontiff releasing his magic into the world in his enraged state, you have to watch out for his usual moveset and his AoEs to come out on top. I got stuck here to the point of needing Unri as a summon in my first ever playthrough, and on subsequent runs I found him a little easier and easier as time goes on. He hits fucking hard, but I think his dodge timings aren't that tough, and I've had a lot of good luck in regards to his second phase. Once the stand goes down, it's just regular Pontiff doing regular Pontiff things after all. And yet he lands at number 6. Why is that? Pontiff is a goddamn beast. Dark Souls 3 is my first true experience with a Souls game, and there were a couple of notably tough walls for me. Vort, Greatwood, Aldrich, Nameless, but Pontiff annoys me since he's the only boss in the series that is made way easier with parries that I cannot parry for the life of me. His attacks are just weird. He can be relentless or pretty passive. His clone sometimes helps you with info, other times you accidentally stagger Pontiff and desync them, causing the fight to become a nightmare gank. Pontiff doesn't fuck around. Yeah, I'm with you in regards to his parry timings. My ability to parry in games outside of Bloodborne and Dark Souls is woefully minimal, but even seeing videos of the timings, I struggle to land them on him, and desyncing the clone sounds like one of the worst things that could happen to a person. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. I would like to leave something of a love letter to Pontiff Sullivan. At the time, I wasn't that good at Souls-likes, but I managed to come to this boss. I step into the cathedral onto the polished floor, going past rows of seats that haven't been used for years, and there stands Pontiff looking at you without a pair of eyes. His swords light up, one with flame and one with dark moonlight. You hear the orchestra, and he kicks your butt and looks good doing it. I didn't ever have such a difficult time with a boss coming off of Dark Souls 1. He is, in my opinion, the first Elden Ring style boss where combos are endless, but also majestic to watch. I'm honestly surprised people complain about Elden Ring, but don't mention him. I still like the boss. I tried so many strategies, it felt hopeless, then I decided to summon 2 NPCs and step into the fog gate. I parried every attack I could, I tried to distract the phantom he summoned, and in the end I beat him. This is what Dark Souls is about. I think the reason he doesn't get brought up in regards to Elden Ring discourse is because his combos don't go on for quite as long as you might remember. They almost always have an end point with Breathing Room, more in line with Dark Souls 3. Especially now we have R'Larna in the Erdtree DLC, who is literally Pontiff Sullivan if he transitioned into being an awesome Moon Knight. Loved your story though, I think it touches on why Pontiff lands so high. This is the first boss where many of your comments from the voters involve discussing summons. He really was that much of a wall for people to overcome, and he shows up at the halfway point of the game. That's crazy. But he's not in our top 5. At number 5, we have the Demon Princes, who scored a total average of 7.98 out of 10. Now we're in the big leagues. The fact that our top 5 is entirely comprised of DLC heavy hitters and the base game's hardest optional boss says that my community got this ranking right, and From Software balanced things to perfection. What can I say about the Demon Princes? Well, they're a brilliant gank fight that turns into a spectacular solo fight, and depending on which demon is slain first, the Demon Princes will gain a host of different abilities to kill the player with. I like that in the first phase you have one boss being aggressive while the other stays back passively. The poison usage is also smart, ensuring the player keeps moving instead of sticking to one spot, and the fact that both princes have solid health pools means that the player can't afford to play carelessly, lest they don't have the resources to handle phase 2. I always try to go with the Demon Prince that uses lasers in phase 2, as opposed to the shower of horrifying fireballs, because I just think the laser is easier to dodge, or at least easier to understand. The other variant of the fight just isn't for me, and that's okay. The Demon Prince moveset is vast, ferocious, and the boss moves around a lot throughout the fight. But it works here, because when you do land hits, you can generally get quite a few off as you go, and the Demon Prince is more susceptible to being staggered than your average foe, which is a way to shave off some of its health. I know the voters have a lot to say, so let's jump right in. I feel the Demon Prince to be underrated by its difficulty and its quality at the same time. I can say that it is one of the most balanced, if not the most, gank fights in the Souls series, and a perfect example of how to keep a player busy and involved without making the whole battle unfair. The Demon Prince feels like a wild beast with its bashy attacks and its mood changes. Seriously, when they switch the roles between themselves, sometimes it looks so unexpected and gives more depth into the character. It feels natural, and distant attacks that make you stay focused and use your side visions to be aware of it. Second phase is another talk. The Demon Prince goes all in, and my first reaction was to run and hide. But because it is a wild beast, the best option was to keep it patient and tame it. I adore this fight. P.S. Thank you so much, Billy, for your content. It gives me a lot of positive energy in tough times. It's such a well-designed fight in terms of the gank portion, having the pair set in their interchangeable roles, and I love the way you describe them as a wild beast that needs to be tamed. One of the stranger but more respectable analogies I've heard in a while. Positive energy to you, my friend. I think Demon Prince was the hardest fight for me on my first playthrough. Starting the fight off with a gank seemed tough at first, but eventually I was able to understand how one was passive and the other aggressive, and began to go with the flow. What really made the fight hard was the second phase. Originally, I had no idea the Demon Prince had a special move that changed depending on which demon you kill first, and just my luck, I kept killing the one that gave the Demon Prince the Meteor ability. Seriously, that range in difficulty was crazy. It could go from easily dodgeable lasers to spawning giant meteors that could one-shot you even with an ember. Not to mention, the Prince spawns 2 constant fireballs that prevent you from interrupting the attack. That was the only boss I remember having the use of a more powerful weapon, Black Knight Halberd, to actually make a bigger impact. Thank God I'm not the only one who hated the meteors. They're just absolutely brutal to deal with, and I don't see why anybody would do that to themselves when the laser variant is sitting right there. Just don't go on Fextra Life to figure out which demon to kill first, they have them backwards for some reason. Besides the difficulty in the fight, I love how you can choose your own adventure with how Demon Prince fights you. At least a bit. The gank of the two demons is well balanced, but still quite hard from my playthroughs. Though I was lucky to kill the demon from below after Demon of Pain, cause I discovered after that playthrough there's a community consensus on the laser being easier to dodge than the meteor. I was also unaware of the fact running away till one powers down is good for when they both attack at once. I brute forced it then, but now I have a much easier time of it. Most of the voter comments here share the same sentiments. The Demon Princes are a solid gank fight, well designed, but that one half of the second phase is easier than the other half, and that choose your own adventure nature actually helps this boss, because it doesn't force players to deal with the bullshit meteor attack and thus reduces their level of difficulty to manageable but fair. If we had to deal with the meteors every single time, I wonder if this boss would place higher. At number 4, we have Slave Knight Gale, who scored a total average of 8.58 out of 10. The final boss of the entire Souls series, a fight for the blood of the Dark Soul itself. I fully agree that it's not the hardest fight in the game. While on my first playthrough it took me a very long time to conquer Gale, nowadays he doesn't pose much of a threat. His health pool is vast, which means his fight always lasts for a long while, but his combos in his first phase are surprisingly simple to avoid, and healing was never much of an issue. His second phase, where he begins using the Dark Skull magic, is where things get tough, as you have to avoid more AoEs and extra magic attacks, on top of his never-ending crossbow bolts firing at you without so much as a second glance. Love the move where he leaps over you while firing bolts downwards before launching into another combo, or how his cape becomes this cacophony of souls as he whips it towards you like a weapon, or how in phase 3 he bursts forth angry dark skulls in a storm of lightning and death, forcing you to play carefully with your positioning so you don't end up rolling into an incoming lightning strike. All of his attacks have long combo strings, but are very lenient on how you dodge them, and I found panic rolling a valid strategy in small cases, while more instinctual dodging was able to get me through the rest of the fight. I always felt that Gale was incredibly tough, and easily one of the best fights in the series, but I never agreed with the take that he was the most difficult fight in Dark Souls 3, and it seems that my community has also come to this conclusion as well. Over 90 mentions of Gale in my voter comments, so you guys get it, I can't show them all. What can I say about Slave Knight Gale that has not already been said? The lore behind the battle, the music and setting, absolutely amazing. As for the fight itself, it took me a few attempts due to my habit of trying to get that one extra hit in and being punished for it. Gale has a very fair and learnable moveset that feels rewarding once you defeat him after learning it. Gale definitely is the type to punish greed, but it's always so tempting to go for that extra hit, because you think you can tank another hit or two before needing to heal, and then he crossbow staggers you to death. Truly the pinnacle of Soulspawn. Gale whooped me hard. I remembered getting to him 3 days after Ring City released and counted like 45 deaths to him in one night. Came back another night and died another 50-ish times, came back later, died 7 times, and ended up cheesing him on the wall to the left when you enter and sprayed toxic poison mist through the wall till he died. He is the only boss to make me change my whole entire setup and actively seek a way to cheat through his insanely large health pool and phase 2 mechanics. That cape will forever scar me. I like to show both ends of the spectrum when I can, and I love that we still have people who find Gale this insurmountable. I like getting out of my own echo chamber every once in a while, and I love that bosses in Soulspawn are tough enough to inspire people to change up their builds, even if it comes at the expense of a ton of cheese. Definitely proves why I landed at number 4 on this list. On the other end of the spectrum, when it comes to Slave Knight Gale, I had heard so much about him before I played the game. When it comes to his moveset and design, along with difficulty, this was before I decided to play the game myself. I had heard that he was a very challenging and engaging fight, however when I finally got to him, he was nothing more than a pushover to me. His attacks were pretty easy to telegraph and dodge, with the only issue from him being the attack where he throws out the light discs and you lose sight of them for a few seconds. I love him as a boss, however he just didn't live up to the expectations that I had for him. P.S. I really love your videos and keep up the great work. Yeah, I can totally see this too. It's why I don't go out of my way to say that Gale is the hardest boss in the game, because to be honest, I don't think he is. And saying that sets up this expectation for his fight, when in reality we should be hyping up how exciting his fight is from the perspective of finishing the story of the Souls series, or just having exciting gameplay. It's fabulous, so much fun, definitely challenging for Souls newcomers and some veterans, but after facing Malenia and the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC's final boss, he is nothing in terms of difficulty compared to them, straight up. At number 3, we have the Nameless King, who scored a total average of 8.6 out of 10. Well, this is a surprise. Personally, I find the Nameless King to be my hardest Dark Souls 3 boss. I even stated that in a video earlier this year, and I stand by it. His Phase 1, King of the Storms, may seem easy nowadays, but it took me a long time to practice to get to the point where I could handle all of its moves. Learning the timing of the lightning bolt from the air, or when to run away because flames are coming from above, or when to run in and boop the head while it's doing the horizontal flamethrower cone, avoiding the wonky hitbox of Nameless's spear as he tries to slam it down on you while you're near his dragon's head, and the camera. It's a part of the fight I know not everyone enjoys, but I do think it's a serviceable warm-up for Nameless's Phase 2. Here, the Nameless King introduces himself as the king of delayed attacks. Everything comes at you with the sense of weight and force, with every attack catching you off guard. Panic rolling will sometimes work, but eventually you're forced to learn the timings of certain attacks so you can get as many free hits as possible before the next combo is launched. He always catches me with his spear slam, followed by his electricity bursting outwards in trails. I just always end up getting in one of said trails and I can never avoid it. His grab is also tough to dodge and gets you lifted up, shocked, and flung away assuming you survive the initial damage. Combined with an arena that makes depth perception very difficult due to the terrain, and you have a boss fight that more than earns its place as one of the toughest in the business. For me, I always feel nervous facing Nameless, more than any other boss, because his timings are just that off for me. Bangin' Motoi Sakuraba soundtrack though. Nameless King is a bit overrated when it comes to difficulty. I don't think he's too hard to dodge, since the game and trilogy as a whole has been teaching the player to dodge enemy attacks when they swing, not the wind-up. Yes, he hits hard, but they're easy to dodge through, some are easily strafed, and you can avoid his charging lightning attack by simply looking away from the boss. King of the Storm is a bit easy for me, but you must play locked off, as the camera will be your main opponent in the fight if you play locked on. This is so interesting to me because I feel like there is this sentiment in the community overall that people don't think Nameless is one of the hardest bosses in the game, yet he still ends up creeping to the top of these polls. I respect this user finds him easy enough, but objectively, I don't think I'd say his difficulty is overrated, at least in regards to Dark Souls 3. Maybe if you take the full series into account, you can make that case though. Nameless King was undoubtedly the hardest base game boss for me to defeat. Although it wasn't because of the first phase, it took about 2 seconds to realise that any difficulty from King of the Storm was stemming from camera issues, as the King's attacks are well telegraphed and visible as long as you position yourself well. But the second phase just flips the script. Nameless has a very specific rhythm to his attacks, and if you don't adjust to it, you'll have a tough time. His delayed attacks combined with a massive moveset, lots of mobility, and heaps of damage make every dodge precious and make Nameless an impressive challenge. He really was one of the first bosses to lean heavily into delayed attacks. It was such a novel concept at the time, something that I feel has become a bit overused in modern Soulsborne games, as From Software look for new ways to promote difficulty among their fights. Nameless did it before it was cool. Nameless King used to be the hardest boss in Dark Souls 3, that is until Elden Ring came out and everyone got good at delayed attacks. Not denying that he's still super hard, but Elden Ring dropped him out of my top spot. P.S. Billy, I just want to point out you are my favourite Souls content creator to date, and it's not even close. Don't change, love from New York. Thank you for the kind words, and a valid point you just made. The fact that we're also used to Elden Ring's combat flow now, does that make Nameless easier by comparison? I think depending on the player, yes it does. For me, I tend to struggle regardless because I don't handle switching gameplay styles too well. Anytime I go back to Bloodborne or Sekiro, it takes a few hours for things to re-click, and I suspect that would happen with me in Nameless. but I think it explains why he's not in our top spot, though I already predicted who our top 2 would be before I even posted the poll. And number 2, we have Dark Eater Midir, who scored a total average of 8.69 out of 10. Let's get into it. For the longest time, Dark Eater Midir was considered the toughest boss of Dark Souls 3, because back when the Ringed City DLC first came out, none of the official guides at the time clocked that the way to do damage to him was via his head. Obviously now we all know that, and following Elden Ring, which beat that into our heads thanks to the copious amounts of dragon fights, I think it's safe to say that Midir's difficulty was lowered just a bit. What I love about his moveset is that while it is without a doubt extra in its animations, with a ton of hard-hitting combos, stomps, swings, bites, flame attacks, almost all of Midir's attack strings end with Midir's head in perfect range of the Ashen One. This boss was designed to allow you to attack it once it was done flailing. His fire breath attacks are a bit tougher to dodge, at least in my experience, and despite first trying Midir on 2 separate occasions, I can tell this fight was challenging regardless. When he hits his second phase, he gains some new attacks, like a massive affinity projectiles that launch towards the player, or his famous Midir laser, a deadly dark beam that spreads around the arena in an attempt to hit the player. The attack leaves him exhausted upon its conclusion, but to the gag of all of you watching, in my recording of this fight I was able to stagger and defeat him before he used it. I didn't even get to experience Midir's last stand attack in my previous playthrough, I was that good. Can someone please explain to me why Midir is considered so difficult? I had heard about him before playing Dark Souls 3 and I was excited to face the hardest boss in the series, but then I beat him on my second try with almost no damage. His moveset just felt kind of standard. Don't get me wrong, it's an awesome fight and possibly the best dragon fight in Soulsborne, but his attacks don't have weird timings, his combos don't have any variations, even his fire breath attacks are always the same after specific combos, and you can easily punish him after each of them. His head being a weak point wasn't a new mechanic either, as it has been used since Dark Souls 1 with the Gaping Dragon. The only difficult things about Midir for me are his Phase 2 lasers, which I've only ever seen once, and the length of the fight, but he isn't any longer than bosses like Gale, Frida, or Demon Prince, which I find much harder. This is a totally valid viewpoint. I think part of Midir's difficulty, as said earlier, came from the fact that not many people thought to attack the head when he first came out. They just saw the legs, saw how little health it did, and thought that was how the fight was supposed to go. Hell, I even fell for it because I didn't end up beating Midir until years after the DLC launched. I think he also has a high damage output, so anyone who burns through their Estus getting greedy might struggle. Weapon type can also play into it. There are reasons for his difficulty, but I certainly don't get hardest boss in the series anymore. However, that's normal. He was hard for his time. It's only natural that those challenges lessen over the years. I have an immense dislike for Dark Eater Midir, almost certainly slightly bolstered by everyone saying it's one of the best dragon fights, I'll admit, but I've fought Midir a few times now and I just do not see the appeal. Most moves aren't too difficult to avoid, and others feel almost impossible sometimes. But that isn't my biggest issue with this boss. My biggest issue is Midir's goddammit fucking health bar. It feels good for the first little bit, and then it just drags on until my ADHD brain loses focus and I get smacked twice and die. Fuck Midir. I assume you already know to attack the head to deal regular damage. The trick with Midir is that by attacking the head, you'll build up a stagger meter that always triggers at least once during the fight. His attacks are dodgeable, but it's less like you need to focus on the full dragon, and more on the specific parts of the body relevant to each attack. Locking on is also a death wish in this fight while you're trying to learn. He also roughly has the same amount of HP as Gale at 15,860, which honestly, after playing the Elden Ring DLC, is on the shorter end for some of the fights I took on there. Sometimes you just don't click with a fight, and that's okay. While Midir is a hard fight, I think he is mostly just an endurance test. If you stay in front of his head, you can see all his attacks coming and dodge them fairly easily, and his head always stays in range for you to hit. It's my favourite FromSoft dragon fight because it fixes the main issues of not being able to see their attacks and feeling like you're just whacking at their legs. An endurance test is the perfect descriptor here, though honestly that's how I find all the FromSoft dragons. They have a different sensation to them compared to regular knight fights. and it always feels like whittling down these giant opponents and hoping I live long enough to overcome their health bars. Midir is easily one of the best though, proving the concept can work exceptionally well, but he's not the hardest fight in the game according to all of you. At number 1, we have Sister Frida, with a total average of 9.4 out of 10. Congratulations to Frida, as she is the highest ranked Soulsborne boss from my community ranking series, second only to Laxasia the Complete from Lies of P, who scored a 9.415. I'll start this segment with my personal thoughts. I don't think she's the hardest boss fight in this game from a personal perspective, but from a communal perspective, I see exactly why she ranks head and shoulders above the rest. To put it bluntly, she's one of only 2 Soulsborne-style bosses, excluding Sekiro, to have 3 health bars, and the other is a giant sunflower, so that's fun. She runs the gauntlet of being one of the most technically challenging boss fights in the game because her mechanics are way harder to learn. Phase 1, you have to learn her moveset on top of her invisibility. You have to learn how she leaps, which direction she leaps in, and how to reach her before she gets off her scythe grab attack that slams you into the floor. I've played her fight enough that I feel like her Phase 1 and honestly her Phase 2 are free passes for me at this point, as in the second phase you can just focus on Father Ariandel. He often separates himself from Frida, leaving him a sitting duck, or you can go after Frida once Ariandel sprints halfway across the arena, as she's less aggressive during this phase. It's what I actually did in my recorded run just to have a little bit of fun, and I got through this level almost immediately. Phase 3 is where I fully agree she is absolutely brutal. I still do not understand every move that she throws out. I swing my weapon, I dodge roll backwards, I pray that she does a combo that keeps her out of my range for a while, and I try to learn her tells. Sometimes she goes invisible, trying to surround you with her ice trails, and it's fun trying to catch her mid-attack, even if it's bloody hard to do so, and her black flames do a ton of damage. The only plus to this phase is how often she staggers out of her animations when you hit her. Low poise is a beautiful thing, and she definitely needed it. For being an absolutely brutal gauntlet, I understand why she's the hardest boss of Dark Souls 3 to all of you, even if for me it's only her third phase I struggle with. Sister Fried is my favourite boss of all time. The first phase perfectly eases you into her moveset with spinning slashes, the invisibility attack and some devastating grabs. Not too hard, but hardly a pushover. It then turns into a fairly balanced 2v1 where you have to be mindful of positioning and to not be greedy with Papa Ariandel, or you'll get caught by Frida's frost attacks. Then you get psyched with a Titanite slab as phase 3 begins. It's the first phase, but cranked up to 100. Sister Frida wants you dead, and you can absolutely feel it. It's like how Lady Maria reaches that level of desperation, yet somehow it still feels fair. Your dodge rolling has to be on point, or you're not getting through the fight, but the more you fight her, the better at phase 1 and 2 you become, which means you have more flasks at the ready for the true challenge. Absolutely exhilarating fight with a great score to match, 10 out of 10. In other words, she served. You explained the Sister Frida pipeline flawlessly. I think you served. You ate, Diva. There's nothing better than realizing you have more and more flasks to play with each time you reach her phase 3. That sense of accomplishment and improvement is unmatched. I have a friend IRL, Koba, who is stuck on Sister Frida, and he's still trying to climb this hill, so I'm seeing in real time how people find Frida tough as fuck, and you know what, I respect it. I've been hearing about how difficult the Nameless King was, and he only took me 4 attempts. Midir killed me only 5 times, and Gale only once. So I really can't figure out why Frida was so hard to me. The first phase is actually my favourite, simple but with an original gimmick that is very fair and fun to figure out. The second phase, honestly, I don't really like, for Frida and Ariandel don't complement each other that much, and the hitboxes for the father are not that great. The third phase is just nuts. Maybe because I was a strength build, I felt like there was no window to attack her, and it got quite frustrating. Some runs later, I've pretty much figured her out, but I feel like being a slower build against her is a huge disadvantage, and I don't enjoy it very much. Frida is one of the strongest memories I have of my first run of Dark Souls 3, but I still think that the Twin Princes Soul of Cinder, Midir, and Gale are overall better fights. Didn't expect to get so much trauma from a nun, thanks Dark Souls. Definitely a good point bringing up slower weapons. Frida is so fast that responding to her in turn with a fast weapon was always the better option because it staggers her more often and quicker to boot. A strength weapon is entirely possible, I've done it before, but it comes in handy more for the first 2 phases as opposed to phase 3 where she's zipping around like an Attack on Titan Survey Corps soldier. Well, it's only fitting the final voter comment of this video is another thesis on our good lady, so let's jump right in. I must speak on the magnificent lady that is Sister Frida. I think this boss is awesome, but at the same time, this boss has me awake in a cold sweat every night. I very well may have developed Stockholm Syndrome, but I'm sure it's fine. I fought Sister Frida probably way earlier than I should have because I heard her boss weapon was a pair of dual scythes. And scythes are my favourite weapons in the Souls games. I first went to the Painted World right when it was available, which was right after Crystal Sage. I quickly learned that this was a mistake, so I decided to return later. I went back after I beat Yorm, who was my second Lord of Cinder. Me and my +7 Great Scythe had a boss weapon to obtain, but I wasn't prepared for the non-stop 6-day journey that ended up taking 193 attempts to conquer. Her first stage I didn't find too difficult. It for sure tripped me up the first few attempts, but once I realised you can see the snow move when she lands after going invisible, it was no problem, and now I can pretty easily no-hit stage 1. Stage 2 is terrifying for me since I have never truly mastered the gank fight. It's a classic Souls gank fight of a big slow enemy and a fast small enemy, but those two both have so many AoEs it took me ages to figure out. In the end, I did conquer it, however I wasn't ready for what came next. I fell for FromSoft's trick in this fight when I saw the Titanite slab drop. I was convinced I had beaten the boss. Black Flame then entered the chat. This third stage alone is why she is my favourite boss aside from my most likely developed Stockholm Syndrome, and is also the reason this took me so many attempts more than other bosses. When I beat stage 2 at the time, I was around 60 attempts. Black Flame is just so fast, and her combos mind-boggle me. Plus, that grab is cool, as it has killed me countless times. The cherry on top, though, is to attempt this third phase, you've got to get through the other 2. The true difficulty of this fight is endurance, the type that I don't think any other boss requires. Each attempt was probably rougher for me than it needed to be due to my underleveled weapon, but I had a mission and I was getting those dual scythes. And those are my thoughts. Thanks for the videos. Those plus the lore of Dark Souls is what got me to play Dark Souls 1 and Elden Ring, since I played Dark Souls 1 first, then Elden Ring, and assumed nothing could get better than that. But after hearing you talk about different parts of other Souls games, I had to try them, so thank you. I knew there'd be at least one person trying to kill Frida earlier than intended, and once again, the fact you persevered so you could get her weapon, I have to respect the hustle. Even more so knowing that you played many of these games because of my content. That's the highest compliment anyone could give, and I hope you continue to enjoy these games for years to come. Sister Frida is yours, and my community's, hardest Dark Souls 3 boss. And that's my list. Which placement did you agree with? Let me know down below, and be sure to parry that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all of my future videos. My social medias are on screen right now. Feel free to follow where you feel comfortable. I recommend my Twitter or my Blue Sky or my Discord, but my Twitter is 100% the best place to go. Trust me on that one, I barely use Discord. Ugh. A massive shout out to my YouTube channel members. Thank you for supporting the channel for another month. You guys are amazing, and I will see you guys in the next video. Adios.